This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now today, emerging markets were boosted by hopes that we could see a quicker economic recovery as, of course, more countries lift lockdowns imposed on businesses. MSCI's index of emerging market shares was up 0.6% on the day. That sentiment didn't do much for Africa's key markets today. South Africa's JSE fell over 1% as investors remain cautious about a pickup in COVID-19 cases reported. In Nigeria, the banking sector did spur some of today's losses, with players like GT Bank, Union Bank and Zenith Bank seeing their share price falling today. Now, also coming up on today's show, Nigeria's central bank to manage how foreign investors move their cash out of the country. 2 publishing houses forced to close shop in South Africa as the coronavirus deals them a final blow. And a Kenyan glass company turns to sanitizing booths to keep afloat during these tough times. Well, we begin global business in Nigeria today, where the central bank says it has put in place policies to ensure foreign investors that want to repatriate their funds can exit the country in an orderly manner. Now, foreign investors have sold Nigerian assets at an accelerated pace since February. This is after lockdowns were enforced to curb the coronavirus pandemic. Economic activity has stalled and the price of oil has crashed, putting pressure on the naira currency and foreign exchange reserves. Now, Nigeria's dollar reserve has declined 24% to $34 billion over the last year. Last week, we saw the central bank weakening the naira currency on the futures market, mostly used by foreign investors to hedge against a fall versus the US dollar. That's by an average of about 73 naira across maturities, and that's a signal that it expects a further depreciation going forward. Now, the Nigerian unit is currently trading at about 390 per dollar. Well, let's find out more about the state of affairs on the ground. We're joined by Phil Ihaza in Abuja. Phil, great to have you on the show. Now, what is suddenly clear right now is that there's a rapidly growing supply gap in the foreign exchange market in Nigeria, and there may not be enough to meet demand or stabilize that exchange rate going forward. So where do Nigeria's FX reserves stand right now, and are CBN's interventions to stabilize the naira working?
Well, thank you, Uche. What we know is that you can imagine that between June last year and April this year, that's about 10 months, the foreign reserves, Nigeria's foreign reserves has lost about 11, or depleted rather, about $11 billion. And that's from over $45 billion to, as at April, $33.8 or $9 billion. That's a huge amount of foreign reserves, pushed from the CBN to try to cushion the effect of the naira and the dollar exchange rate. And so what we also know is that just last month or 2 months in March, the CBN had to because the rates in the unofficial markets were skyrocketing, and as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, the crash in oil prices. So the central bank had to, it doesn't really call it devalue, but adjust. That's what the CBN says. It had to adjust the official rates to from 307 to 360, and then for investors and bureau de change operators, it had to change it to 380. So let's say the rate is 380, but we've still seen, at the unofficial rates since this period, or since recent times, the rates have skyrocketed to over 500 naira to a dollar. That's huge. That's actually a record high, and it's actually putting more pressure on the naira. So whether the CBN is doing enough is not reflecting at the moment with the rates that we are seeing in the country, the naira and dollar rate.
Well, as you mentioned, Phil, the central bank did devalue the naira against the dollar back in March. Some experts are now saying that the case for further naira repricing or devaluation is pretty strong now, given, of course, the scarcity of dollars and poor export earnings coming into the country. Any sign from the CBN that we could see another devaluation soon?
Well, indeed, it's not an easy task now for any head that lies the crown of governance in Nigeria. I do not envy that crown of governance. That's because it's a very tough situation here. We're faced with the CBN trying to maintain the steady rate of the dollar and the naira at the interbank market, but we're seeing that as long as this COVID-19 pandemic continues to place less demand on naira and more on dollar, especially in the Nigerian economy, because the economy is based on imports, more on imports than exports. So we're beginning to see a very tough situation. Some economists have said, you know, that the CBN may be forced any time from now to devalue the naira so that it can meet up with the skyrocketing prices at the unofficial market. Some others have also said, even citing the IMF as saying that the Nigerian government may at this point float the naira to allow the naira rate to be free at the market and be able to, that may actually be very, very shocking, because the rate might rise to maybe even double of what it is at the moment. But the experts have argued that if we had done this before now, by now it would have come down to a stable rate, because there'll be competition and all of that. But it's two answers to this. It's either the CBN may be forced to devalue the naira if this situation continues, or allow the naira float at the interbank market.
Well, let's talk about some of those funding interventions. We know Nigeria is looking to obtain over $6 billion in funding from the World Bank, the AFDB, as well as the IMF. Is it looking likely that it'll be able to get all the foreign borrowing which it needs in order to deal with its FX issues? And inevitably, will that be enough to save the naira?
Okay, so let's look at this, Uche. There's a report from the London Business School that says countries hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic might need at least or about 15% of their GDP to tackle the economic effect of COVID-19. Now, looking at Nigeria's case, our GDP is about $370 billion. If you look at 15% of that figure, it's about $55 billion. And $6 billion, even if we had all of it at the moment, is a far cry from where we're looking at. That's why, of course, the finance minister is also trying to wrap up funds from other avenues, $1.3 billion from other, sources here and there. So we're still not close to the target following that report, because if you also look at other countries like the US earmarked $2 trillion as part of funds to tackle this pandemic, which is about 10% of its GDP. The UK also earmarked 15% of its GDP for the same purpose. So $55 billion is huge. It's more than twice the country's budget for 2020. And you and I know that we're still, the country's actually still looking at ways to fund that budget. So if the country can handle this COVID-19 pandemic, according to some economists, it will need about $55 billion to be able to tackle it effectively.
Certainly a huge figure there. Well, many thanks, Phil, for your insights. That's Phil Ihaza joining us in Abuja. Well, it's not just Nigeria that's spending money to prop up its currency. Leading emerging countries have burned through about $240 billion in foreign exchange reserves over the past 2 months. Now, the Bank of America says the drain is likely to continue, albeit at a slower pace, as central banks look to prop up their currencies and economies in the face of COVID-19. The bank also points out that China, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, and Turkey are amongst countries with the biggest total drop in reserves. Egypt has also seen a particularly large percentage decline. Meanwhile, 35 of Nigeria's 37 states have reported cases of the coronavirus. The surge in the number has created fear and anxiety among citizens. The country has recorded more than 4,300 cases so far. Many people are now seeking ways to boost their immune systems as authorities get ready to reopen their cities. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam with more.
A sense of apprehension across the country following the outbreak and spread of the coronavirus pandemic. That is being heightened, especially as government moves to ease lockdown restrictions. Although a majority of people who contract COVID-19 do not die from it, reports of the fatalities have left many worried. That and the stigma of being infected.
I would say that stigma is even another big epidemic within the pandemic that's happening, because it's born out of fear, it's born out of the fallout, which is discrimination as well. So I would say that the message we put out there is very critical. We can't blame the people who stigmatize, because that's what we all do. So I think, again, the messages that we propagate out there can help extinguish the stigma, extinguish the fear, and then it helps people who need this help to come forward and get it. And then this on its own will be able to curb the spread.
In addition to the WHO guidelines of personal hygiene, wearing face masks and social distancing, many have been exploring measures of protecting themselves, and doctors suggest boosting the immune system.
But what I would say basically is that it's just like every prevention of every other infectious disease, especially those that are either through the air or through waterborne. It's basically about building your immune system. So these things sustain it regardless. So drinking a lot of water basically just gets your metabolism working and also helps boost your immune system. Sticking to your vitamins and minerals. Most of this you get from the fruits that are available in your community. Food supplements of any kind also contain these vitamins and minerals, and this can also help boost the immune system. Regardless of that, maintaining your regular exercises and just staying well, both in your mind and in your body, I think is very essential to combating or preventing the coronavirus.
New COVID-19 cases continue to emerge daily. However, recovery and death rates stand at 20% and 3% respectively. An indication that COVID-19 isn't a death sentence and ultimately could be averted by adopting all health and safety measures. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
Well, let's head to South Africa now. SA Breweries says it may be forced to destroy more than 130 million litres of beer if it is not allowed to transport the brew to the market. Now, the maker of Castle Lager, Hansa and Black Label has been affected by a ban on the transportation and sale of alcohol in the country under the lockdown regulations. The brewer has not made any alcohol since March 23rd or transported any of it since the lockdown in South Africa on March 27th. SAB is not legally allowed to store brewed beer at its brewery facilities above a certain capacity, and it has now reached. It is currently holding around 132 million litres of beer. That's an equivalent of around 400 million bottles in its tanks. Well, Angelo Coppola now joins us in Johannesburg with more on this story. Great to have you, Angelo. Now, SAB says that disposing of this alcohol will prevent it from operating at full capacity for at least 4 months. It also poses an environmental risk. The SAB also says that the government stands to lose up to 2 billion rand in excise taxes. Now, these reasons seem valid enough, Angelo. So what is the hold-up on the government side?
Well, I'm sorry, I'm licking my lips here just thinking about it because I am a bit of a beer drinker. But the bottom line appears to be that SAB Miller has been negotiating with various government departments for a couple of weeks, if not a couple of months, probably from the 24th of March on, to try and find a way around this problem of not being able to move the alcohol and not being able to sell it. The bottom line is they were probably also waiting around to see if the regulations in level 4 would be loosened a little so that maybe some of their product could be moved. It turns out that there was no move and no change there. In the meantime, of course, those negotiations were continuing, and several government departments were involved, and we're suggesting that it's probably Department of Trade and Industry, the Department of Transport, the Department of Environmental Affairs, at least those three. Because if they are going to dispose of any of that alcohol, it has to either go into the water system or it has to be disposed of in another way, and then Water Affairs and Environmental Affairs would get involved. So they did get permission to move the beverages, but it did come too late for that older stock that's probably sitting in those barrels that are brewing at the moment. In terms of that environmental risk, it's unlikely that the brewer could have foreseen having to dump any finished or near finished beer, and that probably added to their stress levels. So the bottom line is that it was clearly red tape and negotiations with the various government departments that could nearly have cost South African tax collectors around $28 million in excise duties. Uche.
Well, Angela, I'm also a bit distressed at the prospect of all the beer that's going to be lost. So what was the rationale then behind the government's move to ban the sale and the distribution of alcohol, especially given that breweries in the country such as SAB now say they could be cutting about 2,000 jobs going forward?
Well, look, we got an insight into how this works and what's driving the government decision-making when we spoke with Mineral Resources Minister Gwede Mantashe in Rustenburg in the Northwest Province last week, in fact. And he provided some really valuable insight into any decision-making concerning the COVID-19 policy. He told us that the health impact and the flattening of the curve takes precedence over any other requirements or issues that might be facing government when it comes to those lockdown regulations. Health Minister Zweli Mkhize obviously says that alcohol leads to several forms of antisocial behavior that places additional pressure on the country's healthcare systems and facilities. There's anecdotal evidence, for instance, that suggests that the hospital emergency rooms are less busy now than before the lockdown, and so they're attributing that to alcohol misuse and abuse. Mkhize, of course, wants to maintain the ban to keep the hospitals and those emergency rooms ready for any surge in COVID-19 cases. He also hasn't given any indication about when that ban may be lifted. Uche.
Well, on the other side of the coin, Angelo, an estimated 75,000 more jobs in SAB supply chain could be affected by this. What has been the overall impact of this move on South Africa's alcohol sector?
Well, look, the brewer, in fact, said to us earlier this afternoon that the broader value chain consists of an estimated 250,000 people. So the impact on the industries, and specifically the alcohol or beer industry, is going to be catastrophic if it carries on for much longer. And if we look at the beer supply chain, as you mentioned, there's 75,000 jobs are at stake there. But the multiplier effect is that some 10 people rely on every single one of those jobs. On a broader level, of course, we know that the economy is probably going to shrink between 4.5% and 16% this year, and that includes those numbers that are coming out of the beer sector. We're also hearing projections that anywhere between 2 and 6 million jobs could be lost this year alone, and that's not good news for the economy. On the social front, on the social grant front, that's also an issue there, because remember that most of those people in that value chain are entrepreneurs who make up a significant proportion of that chain, and if they aren't doing business and earning money by selling beer and other SAB products, then the economy is going to suffer. And of course, there's no tax that can be collected. Uche?
Quite right. Well, many thanks, Angelo, for your insight there. That's Angelo Kupola joining us in Johannesburg. Well, let us shift focus now to some other corporate headlines. Cocoa arrivals at ports in Cote d'Ivoire reached about 1.78 million tons between October 1st and May 10th, and that's according to exporters. Now, this represents a drop of 5.7% from 1.89 million tons over the same period last season. About 14,000 tons of beans were delivered to Abidjan's ports and 17,000 tons to San Pedro between May 4th and May 10th for a total of 31,000 tons. This was a drop of 33,000 during the same week last season. And South African mobile operator Vodacom has reported an 8.9% rise in annual earnings. However, the company postponed issuing a medium-term forecast due to the uncertain economic outlook, as of course the effects of the coronavirus pandemic continue to unfold. Now, growth in the second half of the year ended March 31st more than offset the decline in service revenue during the first half. This was supported by an increase in data elasticity and usage following sharp data price reductions announced in the first quarter. Meanwhile, administrators trying to save South African Airways will appeal a court ruling that ordered them to halt a layoff process. The Labour Court's decision to side with two trade unions in its judgment on Friday was a major blow to the administrators, as they have said that layoffs are necessary in order to avoid the airline being liquidated. State-owned South African Airways has been fighting for its survival since entering a form of bankruptcy protection in December. And British Airways owner IAG has exhausted every avenue to shore up its finances and is burning through cash. CEO Willie Walsh told Parliament's Transport Committee that IAG will have to review plans to resume flying in July. And that's if the government pressed ahead with plans to introduce a quarantine on most people going into the UK by air. Now, the aviation sector has warned of the fresh damage it will suffer if Britain quarantines international arrivals. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let's head into a short break now, but still to come on the show. Two publishing houses forced to close shop in South Africa as the coronavirus deals them a final blow. And rising demand for internet spells good tidings for Egyptian telcos.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Uche Okoronkwo. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back. Now, print media across the world has been struggling to stay alive. Newspaper and magazine publishers are closing their doors as they're slowly losing the battle against digital platforms. For many publishers, the COVID-19 outbreak was the last nail in the coffin. In the last week alone, two major South African publishing houses closed their doors. Here's CGT and Sumitra Naidu with more on that.
Cosmopolitan, the iconic fashion and style magazine, will no longer brace magazine racks in South Africa. The publishing house that printed Cosmo and a range of other famous magazines in the country was forced to shut down. Associated Media Publishing this week closed its doors after 38 years as a result of COVID-19.
It's a really unfortunate place to be, except for maybe just a handful of entities, precisely because with this virus, many businesses are still closed, the majority of them, and that means they've got no need to advertise, and because of that.
Caxton and CTP Publishers, also household names in South Africa, also announced its closure this week. These publishers could no longer go to print because of the national lockdown, but newspapers and magazine sales were declining long before the virus hit.
So the first issue that you have is that by saying move to digital, you're necessarily excluding a whole lot of people, millions of people. The second problem is, and this is perhaps the bigger one, is that because of course more people are getting online, the bigger problem now is that digital doesn't bring in the revenues. We've seen globally that the big social media platforms have taken up that advertising revenue. Something like 85% of it goes to Facebook and to Google.
While some mainstream newspapers made the move online, getting subscribers to sign on, not all publishing has been successful with the move to digital platforms.
The cover price of the magazine or the newspaper doesn't cover nearly the cost of the resources that goes into it. Paper is very expensive, ink is very expensive, distribution is incredibly expensive, let alone the cost of journalists and research and all the work that goes into it.
The South African Freelancers Association says over 50% of their members have lost more than 70% of their income since the outbreak. Hundreds of journalists have also lost their full-time jobs. South Africa is not alone in this. Bauer Media Group in Australia also closed 7 magazines in less than a week, resulting in more than 200 job losses. The German multimedia conglomerate publishes more than 60 magazine brands in the country. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, like many places around the world, the COVID-19 pandemic has pushed millions of Egyptians to work or study from home. The telecom sector has seen a significant increase in demand for services, including internet. It's one of the few sectors that have been thriving under this pandemic. Well, Egypt has more than 95 million registered mobile users, and CGTN's Adel El Maroui has more on that from Cairo.
When the Egyptian government declared a night curfew last March to help curb the COVID-19 pandemic, overnight, demand for internet services spiked. Millions have started using video streaming, online education and work meetings platforms. While businesses were slowing down, the telecom sector was seeing unprecedented traffic.
Before the quarantine until now, I believe there is close to 40% increase in the data consumption and in data traffic. There is an increase of 50 to 60% increase in the usage of our digital interfaces, the digital money, or what we can call the mobile wallet. We have Orange Cash, which is one of our digital money transfer services, which is as well is now seeing a big demand.
After years of investments in networks, Orange Egypt was quite prepared for that data surge. The company was already planning for the next digital consumption wave. The coronavirus pandemic has made that shift to digital platforms even faster.
Demand on data usage, that's one of the big opportunities. Work from home applications on mobile broadband is as well one of the big opportunities. Online education is one of the big things as well, and I think this will continue for a while. And now, when 95% of our employees are working from home, even the customer service is working. I can tell that the whole night shift is now working from home. So this as well, one of the trends that I think it will continue after the COVID-19 impact.
But there have been the downsides too.
We've been definitely impacted by the inbound tourists, and as well we're impacted from the outgoing business travels and so forth. So this is one of the things. Definitely having our shops working with limited hours at the beginning, they're not working in the weekends as well, affecting a bit the growth of the whole economy. So being part of the community, being part of the whole world, we're a bit impacted.
The rise in data consumption has put pressure on networks infrastructure. That will lead to higher services and maintenance costs for cellular towers. Overall, the positive impact COVID-19 has on telecom communication should outweigh the negatives. It's still too early, though, to say how much of an impact the pandemic has on their annual performance. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Meanwhile, Ethiopia's first privately owned information technology hub says it has managed to withstand the negative economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic so far. Gebeya Incorporated has received funding from international investors, including an injection of $1 million from the International Finance Corporation. As CGTN's Coletta Wanjohi reports from Addis Ababa, the company is now assisting other firms in distress.
On a normal day, this training room would be full of people learning IT development. But since March, when the first case of COVID-19 was reported in Ethiopia, Bereket Tafese has been forced to offer his classes virtually. He can take at least 17 students per session. He says some students have to grapple with poor internet connectivity in their homes.
We're recording the sessions. So all the sessions that I present are recorded and stored so that anybody who wants to go back and look at them has the access to. And I think that is one of the pros that's coming out of this virtual teaching, is that people can have a record of that class so that they can go back to it and become more efficient.
As COVID-19 threatens companies, Gebeya, Ethiopia's first private IT hub, has attracted $2 million from 3 international investors. This is in addition to funding directly from the International Finance Corporation.
In 2019, they granted us $500,000 to train 250 women software developers across Ethiopia. That program has been very successful. To date, we've graduated a little upwards of 54 developers, women developers. So successful in the short amount of time that IFC has just granted us another $500,000 to train both women and men this time.
And as a way of keeping other companies afloat too, it has launched a service it calls COVID Relief Service, targeting companies that are struggling to survive.
For example, some of the companies might be struggling with developing their concept because of the current outbreak. They might not be balancing their work as much as they used to. So we're going to be assisting them in positioning themselves in a better way to actually grow better and then be sustainable.
It wants to offer expertise to startups under 2 years old. Gebeya says it is offering free consultation services now to these companies as a way of building business relationships so that in future they will hopefully become business partners. The government is also looking at a nationwide strategy of growing the digital economy.
We've tabled a new fund to the Council. The Ministry of Finance has tabled this fund, and that has been announced, and the major implementer would be the Ministry of Technology. Yes, we will be very, very supportive of this. And in fact, what this shows is even post-COVID, digital economy is going to be one important source of growth for Ethiopia.
Before COVID-19, the government had begun revising its 15-year-old policy in a bid to digitize the nation's economy. It will need the expertise of developers like these ones to implement this even faster, now that COVID-19 has raised the value of the digital economy. Coletta Wanjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
You are watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a short break now, but still to come. Spain begins easing one of Europe's strictest lockdowns. And in the UK, the lockdown has increased the country's poverty levels.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Just about 1/2 the hour, let's recap today's top headlines. There are now more than 64,000 confirmed cases of the coronavirus and over 22,000 recoveries across Africa. According to the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the death toll stands at nearly 2,293. South Africa has the highest number of infections on the continent, with over 10,000 confirmed cases. 206 people have died in the country and over 4,000 have recovered. Egypt and Morocco are also amongst the countries with the highest number of infections on the continent. Now, at least 20 people have been killed in attacks by gunmen on several villages in Niger in the Tillaberi region. Now, the unidentified group on motorbikes reportedly looted shops, stole cattle, and ordered village inhabitants to flee. Since 2017, a state of emergency has been in place in Tillaberi, which borders Mali, Burkina Faso and Benin. Now, militants affiliated to ISIL and Al-Qaeda continue to operate there. 3 UN peacekeepers were killed in Mali when their convoy hit a roadside bomb over the weekend. 4 more were wounded. The Chadian soldiers were on a routine patrol in the North African nation. Laying roadside bombs is a favored tactic of jihadists active in the Sahel. The head of the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali has stepped up efforts to identify and apprehend those responsible. And rescuers are still searching for survivors in Kampala, Uganda, after a 3-story building under construction collapsed on Saturday. 11 people lost their lives in the tragedy, while 4 others were rescued. A team of builders were staying on site at the time of the building's collapse so as to comply with government rules relating to COVID-19. That is a recap of today's headlines. Now, over half of Spain's population are now allowed outdoors in an easing of one of Europe's strictest lockdowns. Under the new guidelines, up to 10 people will be able to gather together. People will also be allowed to move freely within their province. But other large cities such as the capital Madrid and Barcelona have to remain on lockdown for now. Spain has the most infections in Europe with 224,000 cases in total. But the country's daily death toll from the coronavirus fell to 143 on Sunday. That's the lowest figure since mid-March. Meanwhile, New Zealand is set to ease most of its coronavirus restrictions from Thursday. That's allowing restaurants, cinemas and malls to reopen now. The country is expected to phase out its lockdown over the next 10 days. New Zealand now only has 90 cases after a 7-week lockdown. Here's Owen Poland reporting.
After almost 7 weeks of lockdown and self-isolation, New Zealand is finally about to get a taste of freedom this Thursday, when the country moves from level 3 to level 2. Over the past 3 weeks, New Zealand has recorded a very low number of new infections, and 93% of the victims have now recovered, which leaves just 90 people still with the virus. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says that this was a war that we could win if we acted as a team of 5 million people, and she's thanked everyone for their sacrifices during the lockdown. Over the past 7 weeks, New Zealand has achieved one of the highest testing rates in the world, and it's also built up its health system and contract tracing system to manage any future outbreaks. The Prime Minister says that we have not yet won the war against COVID-19 because there's still a chance of some silent spread in the future. But she says the country is now ready to move to level 2 as safely as possible. What that means is that schools can reopen from next Monday, although many parents have indicated that they're afraid to send their children back to school into a potentially risky environment. So it seems a lot of students will stay at home if their families can afford it. The retail sector, including cafes and restaurants, can also reopen this Thursday, but it's going to be anything but business as usual because of the ongoing need for strict social distancing, which means that customers will be separated by at least 1 metre and have to be seated. The good news is that people will finally be allowed to travel around the country, which will provide a much needed boost for domestic tourism and regional towns that have been hit hard by the travel bans over the past 2 months. Events like weddings and funerals will also be allowed under level 2. However, these will be limited to just 10 people, and other mass gatherings will be limited to 100 people. The key message in level 2 will be to play it safe and keep your distance. So everyone will need to keep that social distancing going and observe strict hygiene procedures. And later this week, on Thursday, the government will reveal its economic budget for 2020, which is expected to paint a very bleak picture of the New Zealand economy heading into a potentially long recession with mass unemployment and business failures. Owen Poland, CGTN, Auckland.
Now, UK charities say that poverty is rising in Britain during the lockdown. According to some experts, levels of social deprivation were already high before the outbreak. The government has been accused of cutting public spending in the decades since the global financial crisis. Now, UK food banks say they are the busiest they've ever been. Here's Ayolo Ap Daford reporting.
For many, the coronavirus lockdown is increasing the misery for those on low incomes.
When I ran some figures the other week, it showed over a 3-week period in 2020 since COVID-19, and the same 3 weeks in 2019 showed a 500% increase in the number of people that we're feeding.
Charities like Pekin and the Southwark Food Bank have several schemes to help people. It's a safety net, especially when the government's benefit system called Universal Credit is seen as being slow and difficult to understand.
We're seeing a lot of people who have been made redundant because of COVID-19 and suddenly have no money. You know, they've been paid, but that's covering the debts from the previous week. They have no money going forward. They're quite scared. A lot of them don't understand the benefit system, and it's a case of they just are out of money.
Every day, donations from wholesalers, supermarkets and individuals arrive. Tinned and fresh vegetables and fruits are sorted by volunteers and then placed in boxes for around 250 families in London's borough of Southwark who depend on this food bank. During this pandemic, it's an essential help for many who've never had to receive support before.
Thank you very, very much.
Not a problem, you're very welcome. Take care.
You too.
Food parcels have to be delivered now because people obviously with the national lockdown have to stay indoors, and drivers who are volunteering will take enough food for a family for 3 or 4 days.
Public spending increases in response to the virus have been promised by the state, including boosting universal credit. Adults over 25 years old can receive almost $500 per month, but that's still well below the $740 per month for a single-person household that's widely considered necessary to avoid poverty in the UK.
I think probably there's no doubt that we're doing the government's work for them. However, I'm afraid I don't believe that the government would do the work if this wasn't done, and so therefore I don't think it's the right thing to do to step back and not provide this sort of support. But yes, I feel very angry. It's a mess, and some people are getting support and there are many who aren't.
As another load arrives at the food bank, it will take time to gauge how hard this virus has hit those in poverty. Yoab David, CGTN, South London.
Now, the coronavirus pandemic has had a significant impact on China's small companies, its farmers as well as its exporters. Their sales channels were heavily affected by COVID-19 lockdowns and quarantines. But now many of those businesses have gone online to clear their inventory stock over the past 2 weeks. They're doing so during the second annual Brand and Quality Online Shopping Festival. CGTN's Zhang Yungfeng has more.
There's never a better time to sell products online. The Brand and Quality Online Shopping Festival ran from April the 28th to May the 10th, just wrapped up with almost all of China's mainstream online shopping platforms making promotions. Alibaba's Taobao is a key platform that's focusing a lot on helping exporters who are directing sales to domestic market.
淘宝特价版特地发布了对外贸企业的整个10条帮扶措施。
Taobao has initiated 10 measures to help small companies. They include reduced fees, finance, logistics, and helping exporters sell their products domestically. We are promoting the C2M business model so that manufacturers can sell directly to consumers, as they don't have other sales channels.
Live streaming is also an important way of sales that's gone very popular, especially for farmers in remote areas. In some counties, even county chiefs took part in live streaming to sell local food. In Zhejiang province, hundreds of hosts broadcast live on Taobao to sell 200,000 kilograms of local oranges. Over 1 billion parcels had been delivered during the 5-day-long Labor Day holiday, according to China Post. That's nearly a 40% increase thanks to the online shopping festival. The festival is organized by the Ministry of Commerce, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, State Post Bureau, and China Consumer Association. Online shopping, live streaming, these technologies are not just for convenience at the moment, but to some degree life-saving for China's small companies and exporters. Hopefully, this digital way of sales can help them through the hardest time ever for their business. Zheng Junfeng, CGTN.
Now, the Shanghai Hongqiao Import Commodity Exhibition and Trading Center has launched the International Cultural Festival to promote the sale of imported goods. CGTN's Zhang Shixuan was there and brings us this.
Luxury bags, shoes, wines, and coffee. Italian products are now displayed all around this hall at the Hongqiao Import Commodity Exhibition and Trading Center as part of the International Cultural Festival.
From all parts from Italy, so you can enjoy all the new wine, and also there are many restaurants. I believe that it could be a great occasion for everybody to have a look at this event. It could bring something more to you about the Italian experience.
This year marks the 50th anniversary of the establishment of the diplomatic ties between China and Italy, which was also a guest of honor at last year's CIIE. One manager says the two-week event is to promote the sales of Italian goods by showcasing its culture.
We have products from different countries on sale, so we can better demonstrate their characteristics. We want to combine tourism, shopping, and entertainment. We will hold activities like DIY to give people a better understanding of products and exhibitors at the CIIE.
The International Cultural Festival will promote products from Greece, Japan, and countries in Southeast Asia. The city launched the 2020 Shanghai Imported Goods Festival on May the 5th as part of the Double Five Shopping Festival. During the May Day holiday, the Hongqiao Import Commodity Exhibition and Trading Center welcomed more than 10,000 customers, with sales reaching 1 million yuan due to discounts on most products.
I came to find something interesting. I saw the beef. Products here are relatively cheap.
I want to buy the Malaysian tea. I once tasted the tea. The price is 28 yuan, not expensive. I like shopping here.
More than 500 and over 40 online platforms are participating in the Imported Goods Festival, including Greenland Global Community Trading Hub, Red App, and Ymato.com. About 1,300 foreign companies have signed up to participate at the China International Import Expo in November this year. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Meanwhile, Indonesia's government has extended COVID-19 restrictions until the end of May in an effort to curb the spread of the virus. Now, as more people are required to stay at home, digital karaoke platforms such as Jukes are now gaining popularity. Well, CGTN Silkina Al-Hualia speaks to those who are resorting to singing to kick the blues away.
Julian has spent most of the past month at home, an unusual routine for the active student. But Indonesia's coronavirus regulations require him to be in quarantine. For Julian, connecting with others is the most important part of his day, and he's doing that through karaoke.
Since the beginning of the pandemic, I sing more often because I have more free time. I do it maybe 2 or 3 times a day, whenever I need to cheer myself up.
Julian uses Jukes, a musical platform from China's Tencent group. Its karaoke feature is gaining popularity across Southeast Asia. Other users like Amalia are able to reach VIP status through virtual coins and gifts, which has given her bank account a massive boost.
This app has really helped me financially during the lockdown because they invite artists to sing and go live. We can get gifts that can be exchanged for money. Everyone can make money from Jukes. Some of us have also donated the revenue from Jukes to relief efforts.
Skimo Rizki has been in the music industry for decades, and he's watched it evolve throughout the years. He says while Jukes gives musicians a wider online platform, Indonesia's music scene still relies on offline marketing.
Jokes entered the Indonesian market with offers that perfectly fit consumer behaviors, especially with easier payment methods. Locally, Jokes is more accessible than Spotify, but it is not intended to replace the offline music sources.
The COVID-19 outbreak is changing the way people consume entertainment online. Jukes has recorded a 50% increase in users in just 1 month. As more people are continuing to stay home, the app's popularity is only going to rise. Indonesia has a huge online market that's mostly dominated by young people. And this pandemic has opened up even more opportunities to drive the country's digital growth. Sulkina Aluwalia, CGTN, Jakarta.
Well, let's move on now. Take a look at how commodity markets performed today. Oil prices are falling at the start of the week. A new wave of coronavirus infections in some countries and, of course, concern over a persistent glut cancelled out any support from supply cuts. Now, experts are saying that traders are starting to realize that the size of the supply-demand imbalance leaves little room for optimism. Also, storage in the U.S. continues to fill up with crude. Meanwhile, gold prices are a little more positive today, holding above the key 1,700 per ounce level, as, of course, its safe haven status continues to lend to its appeal. Now, traders say gold is poised to move higher in the longer term, and investors are trying to get their hands on the metal before it rockets even higher. Well, let's take a short break now. Still coming up on the show. A Kenyan glass company turns to sanitizing booths to keep afloat during these uncertain times.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Continental, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, Nigeria generates over 30 million tons of solid waste annually. That's a big problem for the fast-growing nation of almost 200 million people. In order to cut back on that waste, a green initiative, Eco Barter, is teaching women how to turn waste into wealth. CGTN's Deji Badmus has that story.
It all begins from here, the sorting of waste nylon collected from around the city of Abuja. After sorting, the nylon is then neatly cut into fine thread, which is then taken to the loom. Hawa Mahmood does wonders with the nylon thread on this floor loom. She's one of the local women trained by Eco Barter on the conversion of waste to recyclable products. And now, she's making the most of the skill and earning money. After the looming, the end product is usually amazing. They come in the shape of tote bags, school bags, purses, and even shoes. All of them eco-friendly.
I have now, at least I know how to use my waste, how to use it wisely. I don't use plastic bags. I don't waste my plastic bags. At least I can use one plastic bag to go to market 2 times or 3 times, unlike before. Now when I come, I'll just throw it away. I've learned how to make proper use of it.
Since February 2018, EcoBata has empowered 40 other women like her by training them on the eco lifestyle and give them loans to start up their own microgreen enterprises.
At the core of our work, right, is keeping the environment clean and empowering local communities. So turning plastic bags into wealth brought two opportunities with it. First, we were transforming waste and cleaning the environment, and then secondly, we were able to empower women in our community.
EcoBata has so far collected over 200,000 kilograms of solid waste in Abuja alone, including plastic bottles, cans, paper, carton and plastic bags, and turning them into biodegradable and fashionable products. But marketing them has been a challenge they're aiming to solve with technology.
EcoBata recently launched an online mall where we sell strictly eco-friendly products for everyday use, so bamboo products, and so we've leveraged on that platform to sell the materials we make from here.
The eco-friendly enterprise is also milking some of the opportunities from the COVID-19 pandemic by making recyclable face masks for sale.
So what we did was leverage the COVID-19 outbreak to divert our resources into making nose masks. So with the nose masks, we're able to partner with other organizations that were giving them out, and that way the women were able to earn some living from it.
The world is generating more waste than it can recycle, so much that a 2019 World Bank report forecast that waste generation will drastically outpace population growth by more than double by 2050. That's why EcoBata is aiming to institute recycling in every household and influence people to make conscious choices to buy products that are eco-friendly, reusable, recyclable and biodegradable. Badmos, CGTN, Abuja.
Now, the demand for sanitization products has been rising since the start of the coronavirus pandemic in Kenya. Driven by that demand, one company is now switching production to making sanitization boots, which are needed to help curb the spread of the coronavirus.
Dominion is a manufacturer of glass, steel and aluminium products. But with the COVID-19 pandemic and changing supply chains, its primary market for its products has instantly vanished.
Business volume had gone down significantly to the point we had nearly zero sales. We were really struggling. We closed down for 2 weeks. So we decided to make these sanitization boots. Thankfully, due to these boots, we have been keeping busy, and we've managed to sustain our business till now.
It took Patel around 5 days to polish up the prototype of the sanitization booth. The motion detective sensor is designed to save water and reduce electricity consumption, making it more attractive to potential clients.
This design consists of a galvanized steel frame. We spray paint it with a zinc paint so to avoid rusting, because the solution recommended by WHO, chlorine, reacts with steel. When someone comes close to it, it will detect, it will start spraying, and it will stop 10 seconds after the person who's walked through.
We bought this actually 2 weeks ago, just preventatives that we have to take now, just in case anything does happen. In the morning, we come at least 10-20 minutes earlier. Everyone washes their hands, goes through this. At lunchtime, they go have lunch, and then they come back again, so twice a day.
Patel is not the only company trying to thrive during this pandemic. Many manufacturers in Kenya have shifted from regular lines to producing urgent virus-related products like protective gear.
The local manufacturing sector has responded to the needs and demands of the COVID-19 situation. The key thing that they're doing is to see as much as possible how they can keep Kenya moving by producing essential products during this time, trying as much as possible to keep the people employed, then able to provide for their families.
Businesses need to keep running if they want to survive. Repurposing production lines is just one of the tactics to stay alive. Chamwono, CGTN.
Well, before we go, let's check in on Africa's currencies today. Kenya's shilling was stable due to weak demand for dollars. That's as the market continues to assess the potential impact of an IMF loan as well as recovering farm exports in the country. Meanwhile, South Africa's rand had strengthened to its best level in almost 2 weeks against the dollar. During today's intraday trading, it firmed to as much as 18.20 rand per dollar. That's its best level since April 30th. Now, traders say risk appetite prevailed in the market as more economies begin reopening. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.